Now we get to the second problem. Historical anachronisms. The claim by Muslims is that the Quran is perfect, does not contain any errors, as the eternal word of God, that being such. It has no history, it has no intentional human interventions, and thus historical criticism created for the Bible does not apply to the Quran. This is what my Muslims have told me for the last 35 years that I've been working in Islam. This is what I've heard over and over again. Historical criticism is not a problem for the Quran. It is only a problem for the Bible. Well, let's take a look. When we look at the Quran, we find that it introduces a Samaritan way too early. In Surah chapter 20, verse 85 to 87, also 95 to 97, it says, "But indeed we have tried your people after you departed, and the Samari has led them astray. So Moses returned to his people, angry and grieved. Moses said, 'And what is your case, O Samiri?'" Samiri is the name for Samaritans in Arabic. Now the problem is Samaritans did not exist at the time of of Moses in 1400 BC. The Samaritans were created by Sargon II, the Assyrian king, in 722, 700 years later. So here's a historical anachronism that is quite common in the Quran. When the Quran borrows stories, it puts the individuals in the wrong place. Now let's go back. We have here has a mosque too early in Surah 17, Ayah 1. "Glorified is he who took a slave for a journey by night from the Al-Masjid Al-Haram in Mecca to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem." This is known as the Miraj. In 621, when Muhammad was woken up in the middle of the night, told to get on the back of the Buraq, the winged horse, and he flew on the winged horse up to Jerusalem. And there at the dome, where the Dome of the Rock is today, where the rock was at that time, which was known as the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, according to the Quran, he then flew up to the seven heavens. Now the problem with that is there was no Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem at that time. That was not built until 710 AD. This is 621 AD. If they want to say it's the Dome of the Rock, that was built in 691 AD. Can you see the problem? That's 70 years later. You cannot have a mosque in Jerusalem that early. There were no Muslims in Jerusalem that early. There was no mosque that early in Jerusalem. If you want to call it the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, so there was no temple there either. So where is this Masjid al-Aqsa in Surah 17, Ayah 1? In Surah 34, Ayah 10 to 11, it says, "And we certainly gave David, we made pliable for him iron, make full coats of mail, and calculate precisely the links," assuming that there was chainmail at the time of David, who lived in 1000 BC. Coats of chainmail were not invented until 200 BC, a full 800 years later. You cannot have it that early. The Quran assumes crucifixion much too early. In chapter 7, verse 120 to 124, you have Pharaoh saying to the sorcerers who were trying to keep up with Moses. Moses was doing all these different signs, these different plagues. And so the sorcerers were trying to keep up with them, and they could not. And so Pharaoh takes the sorcerers and crucifies them. Well, we know that Moses was living in 1400 BC. In Surah 12, Ayah 41, the Pharaoh of that time takes the baker who is in prison with Joseph, takes him out of prison and crucifies him. Now we know that Joseph lived in 1800 BC. Here's the problem. There was no crucifixion that early. Crucifixion was invented in 500 BC. Do you see the difficulty? That's over 1,000 or 1,300 years later. And so the Quran makes these kind of historical anachronisms over and over again, which suggests to me that if you're going to get it right, at least get it right with the crucifixion of Jesus. But then it denies the crucifixion of Jesus. In chapter 4, 157, "And they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them. And indeed those who differ over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following of assumption, and they did not kill him." Now, we do know that historically, almost every historian of the 1st and 2nd century agreed that that was Jesus on the cross. Thales, a Greek historian, was debating Phlegon in 52 AD. That's within 20 years of Christ's death. They were having a debate about the death of Jesus Christ. They mentioned that with the day that Jesus died, the earth shook and the sun went dark, supporting exactly what we see in the Matthew account. So there you have Greek historians that agree with the crucifixion. Lucian was a Greek satirist who, in the 2nd century, talks about the crucifixion of Christ. Marabar Serapian's letter to the pagan in 73 AD refers specifically to the death of Jesus Christ. Josephus was a Jew. He was a Jewish historian, right between 3780 and 9080 in the late first century. He not only talks about the death of Jesus Christ, he mentions curiously that the Christians believe that he rose again. It's the only non-Christian reference we have to the resurrection. And then you have Tacitus. Tacitus hated Christians, had nothing good to say about Christians. Yet Tacitus, in the beginning of the 2nd century, talks about the death of Jesus Christ and gives us the date for it, because he says it happens during the time of Pontius Pilate under the authority of Tiberius. That's why we know today that it happened in 33 AD. Thank God for Tacitus. Though he did not agree at all with what Jesus was or what he said or what he did agree that he did die on the cross. So you have Greek historians, you have Jewish historians, you have Roman historians, all from the 1st and 2nd century, all agreeing that that was Jesus on the cross. Show me any historian that disagrees. Until you get to the Quran. 600 years later, a man who couldn't even read and write, in a language that couldn't even accommodate what he was saying, then suddenly gets a new revelation that Christ was not on the cross. That's in Surah 4:157. But if you go to Surah 19, Ayah 33, Jesus himself, or Isa himself, talks about his death and resurrection as a little child. Blessed be me, the day I was born, the day I die, and the day I rise again. Completely confronting Surah 4, Ayah 157. I leave that for the Muslims to deal with. What about Mary? In Surah 19, Ayah 28, Mary is the sister of Aaron. In Surah 66, Ayah 12, Mary is the daughter of Imran. In Surah 20, Ayah 30, Aaron is Moses' brother. But Mary, all the way through, is the mother of Jesus. How can you have Jesus' mother, who could be the sister of Aaron and the daughter of Amram, who is Amram in the Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 6, verse 20. Now we do know that both Aaron and Moses had a sister named Miriam. But she lived in 1400 BC. And she could not be simultaneously the mother of Jesus, because otherwise she was 1400 years old. And I don't think Mary was that old. It looks like the Quran confuses the two Marys, and confuses and assumes, therefore, that the Mary of the time of Moses is the same Mary, the mother of Jesus. Some say, well, no, that Mary's father is Amram. That's not true. When you look at Luke chapter 3, it's very clear that the father of Mary is Eli. It comes from a completely different line than the father of Jacob, who is the father of Joseph. Now it confuses the Qibla and the Kaaba. The Qibla, Surah 2, Ayah 144 to 149, from 624, all Qiblas should be facing towards Mecca. Yet we now find 4 different Qiblas. I'm not going to unpack this tonight. Come on Saturday. It confuses Pharaoh, the Tower of Babel, and Haman. Surah 28, Ayah 38. The Pharaoh said, "Oh, so kindle for me Haman." Haman? In Egypt? Surah 40, Ayah 36 and 37. Pharaoh said, "Oh, Haman, construct for me a tower." Haman building a tower? First of all, Egypt, they never did build towers. They built pyramids and temples. We don't know of any reference to towers in Egypt. That was another problem. But in Genesis 11, 1 to 9, the tower is in Chaldea in southern Iraq, hundreds of miles away. Haman is not even an Egyptian name. It's a Persian name. And we find it in Esther chapter 3, verse 1, where Haman was the minister of the Persian king Ahasuerus, who is Xerxes, one according to the Greeks, and reigned between 486 and 465. Pharaoh was in 1500 BC. Haman lived in 510 BC. They therefore never met each other because they lived over 1,000 years apart. Are you seeing the problem here? These are anachronisms that Muslims have not yet been able to answer. Then when you get to Al-Qadanai, who's Alexander the Great, in chapter 18, verse 6, he goes and he brings me a sheet of iron, he says, and he builds this between 2 mountains, a wall made out of iron with molten copper put over top. Now, if you build a wall made out of iron with molten copper over top to keep the enemies from getting through, that's a pretty substantial wall, wouldn't you suggest? Why is it no one has heard about this wall? It would be the greatest engineering achievement in the history of mankind. Even today, we can't build walls of iron between 2 mountains. Yet, according to the Quran, this is exactly what Alexander the Great did in 300 BC. Alexander the Great had 3 different biographers who talked about his life. Nowhere in any of the 3 biographies is there any reference to a wall between two different mountains. It refers to futuristic coin, the dirham, 012 by a 20, talking about Joseph being sold for a few dirham counted out. Now, Joseph lived in 1800 BC. Coins didn't even exist at the time of Joseph. They were created by the Lydians in the 7th century BC, over 1,000 years later. The dirham, ironically, did not exist at the time of Muhammad. So how could Muhammad have even talked about a dirham? There were no dirhams at the time. There were drachmas. There were Greek drachmas. There were Persian drachmas. Now, Muslims have said, well, this is the Arabic name for drachma. No, there wasn't. There was no Arabic name for drachmas. They used the word drachma at that time. But dirhams were then introduced in 661, but Muhammad died in 632. This is 30 years later. It's as if I were to come to you, Paul, you're a British man, and I say back in 1960, I would have loved to have bought your coat for 20 euros. It would have made no sense in 1960 to talk about euros. Euros didn't exist in 1960, but they do today. Can you see the problem? That's why you need to look at this as another anachronism. Interestingly, the Bible gets it completely correct. In chapter 37 of Genesis, it says that Joseph was sold for 20 shekels. Shekels is the right denomination. It is a weighted measure. It is 0.2% of kilos of a silver, proving that not only is the Bible correct, but it also, we know from the Nuzi tablets and the Mari tablets, that the price of a slave in 1800 BC was exactly 20 shekels. The Bible gets the right denomination, gets the right price of the slave, the right man at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. And we don't even ask the Bible to do that. It just turns out the Bible is correct, but then I'm not surprised. Conclusion. The authors of the Quran do not know history. God would not make these mistakes. Further proof, these are intentionally human interventions. That's number 2. Let's go to number 3. Source criticism.